The dust from the trail had caked so thick on Clara Vincent's face that she could barely recognize herself in the cracked mirror of her mind's eye. And when she stumbled up to the wooden door of the ranch house outside Shafter, Texas, in the blazing August heat of 1882, she was certain she would die if she did not get water in the next few minutes. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue felt like leather in her mouth, and her vision swam with dark spots that threatened to pull her down into unconsciousness. She raised a trembling fist and knocked 3 times, each rap against the weathered wood taking nearly all the strength she had left. The door swung open to reveal a tall man with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that fell just past his collar. His eyes were a striking green like spring grass after a rare rain, and they widened with concern when he saw her swaying on his porch. "Good Lord," he said, his voice deep and urgent. Come in right now." "Water," Clara managed to croak, the single word scraping against her parched throat. "Please, I need water, of course." He caught her elbow as she stumbled forward, guiding her inside with surprising gentleness for a man with such rough, calloused hands. "Sit here." Clara collapsed into the wooden chair he offered, her legs simply giving out beneath her. She could barely take in her surroundings, her entire being focused on the sound of water being poured from a pitcher. Then a cup was pressed into her hands, and the man steadied it when her fingers shook too badly to hold it properly. "Slow," he instructed. "Drink slow or you will make yourself sick." She wanted to gulp it all down, to pour it over her face and hair, but something in his tone made her obey. She took small sips, each one feeling like salvation sliding down her throat. After a moment, her vision cleared enough to really see him. He was watching her with genuine worry etched across his face, and she realized he was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. Handsome in a rugged way, with a straight nose that had been broken at least once and a jaw dark with stubble. "Thank you," she whispered when she had drained half the cup. "Thank you so much. What happened to you?" He crouched down beside her chair so their eyes were level. "Where did you come from?" "The stage." Clara closed her eyes, remembering the horror of it. "We were traveling from El Paso, heading east. There were bandits. They took everything, shot the driver and the guard, left the rest of us stranded about 15 miles back. I have been walking since yesterday morning." His face darkened with anger. "The others from the stage," an older couple headed back toward El Paso. "A merchant went north, said he knew of a settlement. I thought Shafter was closer, so I came this way." She took another sip. "I was not sure I would make it. You are lucky you did." He stood and refilled her cup from the pitcher. "My name is Daniel Lawson. This is my ranch, the Double L. You are safe here, Clara Vincent." She managed a weak smile. "I am in your debt, Mr. Lawson." "Daniel," he corrected. "And you owe me nothing. Common decency says you help someone who needs it." He studied her for a moment. "When did you last eat?" Clara had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, before we left the way station." He shook his head and moved toward the kitchen area of the open room. "I will make you something. Nothing too heavy right now. Some broth and bread." She watched him work, surprised by his efficiency. Most cowboys she had encountered were helpless in a kitchen, but Daniel moved with purpose, stoking the fire in the stove and setting a pot to warm. The interior of his house was simple but clean, with sturdy furniture and none of the disorder she might have expected from a bachelor's home. "You run this ranch alone?" she asked, her voice growing stronger with each passing minute. "Mostly. I have 2 ranch hands who work for me, but they are out with the cattle right now. We run about 500 head, which is modest compared to some of the bigger operations, but it is enough for me." He glanced back at her. "What were you doing traveling alone?" "I was not alone. I was traveling with the stage." Clara set down her empty cup, feeling more human by the moment. "I was going to San Antonio." My aunt lives there, and she offered me a position helping her run her boarding house. You have no family elsewhere, the question, though asked gently, still stung. My parents died 3 years ago. Yellow fever in New Orleans. I have been working as a seamstress in El Paso since then, but my aunt wrote saying she needed help and that San Antonio had better prospects. She looked down at her hands, dusty and torn from her ordeal. I suppose I will need to write her and explain why I will be delayed. Daniel brought over a bowl of beef broth and some bread, setting them on the small table beside her. Eat this slowly too. Let your body adjust. The broth was rich and warm, seasoned with herbs she could not quite identify. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. Clara had to restrain herself from gulping it down, remembering his warning. Between careful spoonfuls, she studied Daniel as he moved about the house, giving her space but staying close enough to help if needed. He was clearly a man who worked hard. His shirt, though clean, was faded from many washings, and his hands showed the scars and calluses of someone who spent his days handling rope, reins, and ranch work. But there was something gentle about him, too, a carefulness in how he moved around her, as though afraid he might startle her. "How far is it to town from here?" Clara asked after finishing half the broth. "About 3 miles to Shafter proper. It is not much of a town, truth be told. Some mining operations, a few businesses. Most people pass through rather than stay." He sat down across from her, his own cup of water in hand. "When you are feeling stronger, I can take you in. The sheriff should know about the stage robbery. Will he be able to do anything?" Daniel's expression suggested he doubted it. "Sheriff Coleman tries, but bandits hit stages and travelers all the time out here. They scatter into the desert, hole up in the mountains. Hard to track, harder to catch." He paused. "Did you get a look at any of them?" Clara nodded slowly, the memory making her stomach clench despite the warm food. "There were 5 of them. They wore bandanas over their faces, but their leader had a distinctive voice. Rough, with an accent I could not place. He had a scar on his left hand between his thumb and forefinger. I saw it when he reached in to grab the strongbox from under the driver's seat. That is good detail. The sheriff will want to know all of that." Daniel's green eyes were thoughtful. "You are lucky they left you alive." They argued about it. Clara set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone despite her hunger. "One of them wanted to take the women with them. The leader said it would be more trouble than it was worth, that we would die in the desert anyway, so why bother?" He laughed when he said it. Anger flashed across Daniel's face, hot and immediate. "That is evil." "Yes." Clara found herself grateful for his anger, for the evidence that he found such callousness as reprehensible as she did. The older woman, Mrs. Henderson, she prayed the entire time. I think her faith is the only thing that kept her from collapsing. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what she had endured settling between them. Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice softer. "You should rest. I have a spare room you can use. It is not fancy, but the bed is clean and comfortable." Clara wanted to protest that she had imposed enough, but exhaustion was creeping through her limbs, making her feel heavy and slow. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not." He stood and offered his hand to help her up. "Come on. You have been through hell, Miss Vincent. Let yourself rest." She took his hand, noticing how warm and solid it felt, how carefully he supported her weight without making her feel weak. He led her to a small room off the main living area. It held a simple bed covered with a faded quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. A window looked out toward the west, where the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I will be right outside if you need anything," Daniel said. "Do not hesitate to call out." "Thank you." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness of the mattress beneath her. "Daniel, I truly do not know how to repay your kindness." He paused in the doorway, looking back at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Like I said, you do not owe me anything. Get some rest." When he closed the door, Clara finally let herself feel the full weight of her exhaustion. She removed her boots, wincing at the blisters that had formed during her long walk, and lay back on the bed. The pillow smelled like sun-dried cotton and something else, something masculine and clean. Within minutes, she was asleep. She woke to darkness and the sound of voices. For a moment, panic seized her and she thought the bandits had returned, but then she recognized Daniel's deep voice and heard another man responding. Clara sat up slowly, her body aching in places she had not known could ache, and stood on shaky legs. She moved to the door and opened it a crack. Daniel stood near the fireplace with two other men. One was older, probably in his 50s, with gray streaking his dark hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades under the Texas sun. The other was younger, maybe 25, with sandy hair and an easy smile that he wore even now as they discussed serious matters. "So she just showed up," the younger man was saying. "Walked 15 miles through the desert after being left to die by bandits," Daniel confirmed. "She is lucky to be alive, Tom." "Mighty lucky," the older man agreed. "Those stages have been hit 3 times in the past 2 months. Something needs to be done about it. I will take her to town tomorrow to see the sheriff, but I do not have much hope of justice." Daniel sounded frustrated. "The law out here is too thin to do much good." Clara pushed the door open wider and stepped out. All 3 men turned to look at her, and she was suddenly aware of how disheveled she must appear, her hair tangled and her dress dusty and torn. "Miss Vincent," Daniel said, moving toward her. "You should still be resting." "I have rested enough for now." She tried to smooth her hair back, knowing it was a lost cause. "I apologize for interrupting." "Not at all." The older man removed his hat. "Name is Roy Sullivan, madam. I am the foreman here at the Double L. This young buck is Tom Miller." Tom also removed his hat, his smile warm. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Vincent, though I am sorry about the circumstances." "Thank you both." Clara accepted a chair that Daniel pulled out for her. "I hope my presence here is not causing any trouble." "No trouble at all," Roy assured her. "Daniel here has a soft heart under all that tough exterior. He would give the shirt off his back to someone in need." Daniel shot Roy a look that suggested he found this characterization embarrassing. "I just do what any decent person would do." "That is more than most do these days," Clara said quietly. "Decency seems to be in short supply." Tom leaned against the wall, his expression thoughtful. "Did you see which direction the bandits headed after they left you?" Clara thought back, trying to remember through the haze of fear and dehydration. "Northwest, I think. Into the mountains." "The Chinati Range," Roy said, nodding. "Plenty of places to hide up there. Old mine shafts, caves, abandoned prospector camps." "We could organize a search party," Tom suggested. "Some of the other ranchers might join in." Daniel shook his head. "By now they are long gone or so well hidden it would take weeks to find them. Besides, I will not risk good men's lives on what is likely a futile chase." He looked at Clara. "Tomorrow I will take you to Shafter to report to the sheriff and send a telegram to your aunt in San Antonio. After that, we will figure out your next steps." "I need to continue to San Antonio," Clara said, though the thought of getting back on a stage made her stomach turn. "My aunt is expecting me." "Not right away, you are not." Daniel's tone was firm but not unkind. "You need time to recover, a few days at least." "I cannot impose on your hospitality for days," Clara protested. "It is not an imposition." He met her eyes and she saw that he meant it. "You are welcome here as long as you need." Roy and Tom exchanged a glance that Clara could not quite interpret, but both men were smiling slightly. Roy cleared his throat. "Well, Tom and I should head back to the bunkhouse. We have an early start tomorrow with the herd. Be ready to manage things without me," Daniel told them. "I will be gone most of the day tomorrow taking Miss Vincent to town." After the two ranch hands left, an awkward silence fell between Daniel and Clara. She found herself studying him in the firelight, noticing details she had been too exhausted to register earlier. The way his hair curled slightly at the ends, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than he frowned. The way he moved with a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who he was and what he was capable of. "You must think I am a terrible burden," Clara said finally. "I think nothing of the sort." Daniel stood and moved to the stove, where he ladled more broth into a bowl. "You should eat more. You barely touched your food earlier." "I am hungry," she admitted. "Hungrier than I was before I slept." He brought her the bowl along with more bread, this time with butter. Clara ate with better appetite now, and as she did, Daniel sat across from her and told her about his ranch. He had inherited the land from his father 5 years ago and had been building the herd ever since. It was hard work, often lonely, but he loved it. The freedom, the challenge, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. "You ever think about settling down?" Clara asked, then immediately wished she could take the question back. It was far too forward, but Daniel did not seem offended. "I think about it sometimes. A ranch is meant to be a family place, but finding the right woman out here is not easy. Most women want the comforts of city life, not the hardships of ranching." "Some women are stronger than you might think," Clara said. "We are not all delicate flowers." He smiled at that, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger. "I can see that about you. Walking 15 miles through the desert takes a kind of strength most people do not have, man or woman." Clara felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I just did what I had to do to survive." "That is exactly what I mean." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Clara felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not quite name, but that made her heart beat a little faster. She looked away first, focusing on her food. "Tell me more about Shafter. What kind of town is it?" Daniel seemed to understand that she was changing the subject and allowed it. "Like I said, it is small. Started as a mining town about 10 years ago when silver was found in the area. There is a company town for the miners, a few stores, a saloon, a church. The railroad does not come through here, which keeps it quieter than some places but also limits growth." "Is it safe?" "Safe enough as these things go. We get drifters and cowboys passing through, and sometimes they cause trouble, but Sheriff Coleman keeps a lid on things most of the time." He paused. "It is not a bad place, just a small one. Most people are trying to scratch out a living like everywhere else." Clara finished her meal and set the bowl aside. "I should help you clean up." "You should go back to bed," Daniel countered. "I can manage a few dishes. I am not an invalid and I refuse to be waited on like one." She stood, pleased to find her legs much steadier than before. "The least I can do is help with the washing up." They worked side by side at the basin, Clara washing while Daniel dried. It felt surprisingly comfortable, this domestic routine with a man she had just met. Clara found herself relaxing in his presence, no longer feeling like she had to be on guard. There was something inherently trustworthy about Daniel Lawson, something that told her she truly was safe here. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said as he dried the last bowl. "Of course." "What will you do in San Antonio? Your aunt's boarding house, is that really what you want?" Clara considered the question. "I do not know if it is what I want, but it is what is available to me. A single woman without family has limited options. I can work as a seamstress, which barely pays enough to live on, or I can work in a boarding house or as a domestic servant. Those are really my only respectable choices. Have you ever thought about teaching? You speak well and you seem educated. My mother taught me to read and do figures, and I had some schooling before my parents died, but I have no formal credentials. Clara dried her hands on a towel. Why do you ask? Shafter could use a school teacher. Right now, the children either go without education or their parents try to teach them at home. The town has been trying to attract a teacher for over a year. That is kind of you to think of, but I am not qualified. You are more qualified than no one. Daniel hung his towel to dry. Just something to consider. You do not have to decide tonight. But the seed was planted, and Clara found herself thinking about it as she returned to her room. A school teacher. It was more respectable than a boarding house worker, and it would mean independence, her own income, her own life. But it would also mean staying in this harsh, wild country instead of moving to a proper city like San Antonio. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly, wishing she had clean clothes to change into, and ventured out to find Daniel cooking breakfast. He looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Clara admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality. You are welcome." He gestured to the table. "Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." They ate together as the sun rose higher, painting the desert landscape in shades of gold and amber. Through the window, Clara could see rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the distant peaks of mountains. It was a harsh landscape, but beautiful in its own way, vast and open in a manner that made her feel both small and strangely free. After breakfast, Daniel hitched his wagon and helped Clara up onto the seat beside him. The ride to Shafter took about 40 minutes, and during that time, Daniel pointed out landmarks and told her about the various ranches they passed. Clara found herself fascinated by his knowledge of the land and the people who lived on it. He seemed to know everyone, from the elderly Mexican couple who ran a small farm to the group of cowboys driving cattle in the distance. Shafter itself was indeed small, just a handful of buildings clustered along a dirt road. The largest structure was the mine company headquarters, a 2-story building with a false front that made it look grander than it was. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, and a few other businesses Clara could not quite make out from a distance. Daniel pulled the wagon up in front of a building with a sign that read Sheriff and helped Clara down. Inside, they found a man in his 40s with a badge pinned to his vest, sitting behind a desk covered in papers. "Daniel," the sheriff said, standing, "what brings you to town?" "Miss Clara Vincent needs to report a crime, Sheriff Coleman." Daniel gestured for Clara to take the only other chair in the small office. "The stage from El Paso was robbed 2 days ago." Clara recounted the entire story, including every detail she could remember about the bandits, their voices, their horses, the direction they had gone. Sheriff Coleman took notes, his expression growing grimmer with each passing minute. "That is the 4th stage hit this month," he said when she finished. "Same description of the leader too, that scar on his hand. We are dealing with an organized gang, not just opportunistic thieves." "Can you do anything about it?" Daniel asked. "I can wire the Rangers, see if they can spare someone to investigate, but truth is, we are spread thin out here." Coleman looked at Clara with sympathy. "I am sorry this happened to you, Miss Vincent. I am glad Daniel found you before the desert did." "So am I," Clara said quietly. After leaving the sheriff's office, Daniel took her to the telegraph office, where she sent a message to her aunt explaining what had happened, and that she would be delayed. Then they stopped at the general store, where Daniel insisted on buying her a new dress. some basic necessities, and a sturdy pair of boots. You cannot keep imposing on me like this, Clara protested as he paid for the items. I have no way to repay you. Then do not think of it as a debt, Daniel said simply. Think of it as one person helping another. The store owner, a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Patterson, smiled at them both. You are a good man, Daniel Lawson. Your mother raised you right. I try, Mrs. Patterson. He collected their packages. Is there anything else you need, Clara? She shook her head, overwhelmed by his generosity. As they walked back to the wagon, she found herself blinking back tears. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such kindness, such care without expecting anything in return. The world had felt cold and cruel since her parents died, but Daniel was reminding her that goodness still existed. Are you all right? Daniel asked, noticing her emotion. Yes, I am just overwhelmed in a good way. She looked up at him. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me at all. He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. My mother used to say that we are all one bad day away from needing help. She taught me and my brothers that when someone needs help and you can give it, you do. No questions, no expectations. He loaded the packages into the wagon. Besides, you seem like a good person who had bad luck. That is not your fault. They were about to climb back into the wagon when a woman's voice called out. Daniel Lawson, is that you? Clara turned to see a woman about her own age approaching, dressed in a fine green dress that seemed far too fancy for this dusty town. She was beautiful in a delicate way, with blonde curls and blue eyes, and she walked with the confidence of someone who knew she was admired. Hello, Melissa, Daniel said, his tone notably cooler than it had been with anyone else that day. I heard you were in town. Melissa looked between Daniel and Clara with undisguised curiosity. Are you going to introduce me to your friend, Miss Clara Vincent? This is Melissa Harper. Her father owns the mining operation. Melissa, Miss Vincent was a passenger on the stage that was robbed. She is recovering at my ranch. How terrible! Melissa's sympathy sounded perfunctory. I hope they catch the criminals responsible. As do we all, Clara said, not quite liking the way Melissa was looking at her, as though assessing a potential rival. Daniel, you simply must come to my father's party next week. We are celebrating his birthday, and everyone who is anyone will be there. Melissa placed her hand on Daniel's arm in a familiar way that made Clara's stomach tighten. You cannot say no. I appreciate the invitation, but I have the ranch to run. Surely you can spare one evening. Melissa pouted prettily. We used to be such good friends. That was a long time ago. Daniel gently removed her hand from his arm. If you will excuse us, we need to get back. Clara could feel Melissa's eyes on them as Daniel helped her into the wagon. As they pulled away, she could not resist asking, Old friend? Daniel's jaw tightened. Something like that. We courted briefly about 2 years ago. She wanted me to give up ranching and go work for her father in the mining office. When I refused, she ended things. She seems to regret that decision now. He glanced at her, surprised. What makes you say that? The way she looked at you, and at me like I was competition. Clara felt bold saying it, but also curious about his reaction. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, Melissa Harper does not regret anything except that she could not bend me to her will. She wants what she cannot have, that is all. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking along the rutted road. Clara found herself thinking about Daniel and Melissa, about what it must have been like for him to be courted by the richest girl in town and still choose his own path. It spoke to a strength of character she admired. Can I ask you something personal? Clara said finally. You can ask. Do you ever get lonely out there on your ranch? Daniel kept his eyes on the road ahead, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on the reins. Sometimes. The work keeps me busy and Roy and Tom are good company. But yes, sometimes I wish I had someone to share it all with. Someone who understood why I love this life, even with all its hardships. I think I understand that, Clara said softly, wanting someone who sees the world the way you do. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt that same shift she had felt the night before, that sense of something significant happening between them. But before either could say anything more, the ranch came into view and the moment passed. Over the next few days, Clara settled into a routine at the Double L Ranch. She insisted on earning her keep, and Daniel finally agreed to let her help with cooking and mending. She discovered that she enjoyed the rhythm of ranch life, the early mornings and simple meals, the sight of cattle grazing in the distance, the endless expanse of sky overhead. She also discovered that she enjoyed Daniel's company more than she had enjoyed anyone's in a very long time. He was easy to talk to, thoughtful in his responses, and possessed a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Clara brought up the schoolteacher idea again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about teaching in Shafter." Daniel looked up from the rope he was mending, and, how would one go about applying for such a position? There is a town council. You would need to speak with them, prove you can read and write and do mathematics. They would probably want you to teach a demonstration lesson. He set down the rope, giving her his full attention. "Are you seriously considering it? Maybe." "I sent another telegram to my aunt yesterday, explaining everything. She wrote back saying that while I am always welcome in San Antonio, she understands if I want to stay here. She has hired someone else to help at the boarding house." Clara looked out at the desert landscape, now familiar and somehow comforting. "So I have a choice to make. What is drawing you toward staying?" Clara was not quite ready to admit that he was a large part of what was drawing her, so she said, "I like it here. It is hard and wild, but there is something honest about it. And the idea of teaching, of making a real difference in children's lives, appeals to me more than I expected." "You would be good at it," Daniel said. "I have seen how patient you are, how you explain things clearly. You have. When you were showing Tom how to mend that shirt properly, he has been doing it wrong for years, but you corrected him in a way that did not make him feel stupid. That is a gift." Clara felt herself flush with pleasure at his praise. "That is kind of you to say. It is just the truth." He paused, then added carefully, "I would like it if you stayed, but that has to be your decision for your own reasons." Their eyes met, and Clara saw in his face what she had been feeling for days now. This was not just kindness on his part anymore, not just hospitality. Something real was growing between them, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. "Daniel," she said softly, "I know." He stood up as though needing to move. "I know it is too soon, and I know you barely know me, but I need to be honest with you, Clara. These past days with you here have been the happiest I have had in years. I wake up looking forward to seeing you across the breakfast table. I find excuses to come back to the house during the day just to talk with you. And when I think about you leaving, about you going to San Antonio or anywhere else, it feels wrong." Clara's heart was pounding. "It feels wrong to me too." He turned to face her fully. "I do not want to pressure you. You have been through something traumatic, and maybe what you are feeling is just gratitude or relief at being safe. I would understand that. It is not just gratitude." Clara stood as well, moving closer to him. "Daniel, you have shown me more genuine kindness and respect in 1 week than most men show in a lifetime. You have asked for nothing in return, made no demands, treated me as an equal. How could I not develop feelings for you, Clara?" Her name was almost a prayer on his lips. "I am just a rancher. I can offer you this ranch, hard work, a simple life. Nothing fancy, nothing like what you could have in a city." "I do not want fancy," Clara said, surprised by how true it was. "I want real. I want honest. I want a partner, not a provider. And I think that is what you want too." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hands coming up to cup her face with such tenderness that tears pricked at Clara's eyes. "I want you," he said simply. "I want you to stay, to build a life here, to be my wife if you will have me. I know it is fast, I know it is crazy, but when something feels this right, I do not see the point in pretending otherwise." "Are you proposing to me?" Clara's voice shook slightly. "I am saying that I intend to court you properly, to give you time to be sure of your feelings. But I also want you to know my intentions from the start. I am not the kind of man who plays games with a woman's heart." His thumbs brushed away the tears that had started to fall. "I want forever with you, Clara Vincent. I want to build a life and a family and grow old watching the sunset from this porch, but only if that is what you want too." "It is." Clara reached up to cover his hands with her own. "It is exactly what I want. And you are right. It is fast and probably crazy, but it feels more right than anything else ever has." Daniel leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Clara did not want to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and filled with promise. She felt something settle in her chest, something that had been unsettled since her parents died, since the world had become cold and uncertain. This was home. Not a place, but a person. This man who had given her water when she was dying and then had given her so much more. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I should still court you properly, take you to church socials, let people see us together. I do not want anyone thinking ill of you. I appreciate that." Clara stepped back slightly, already missing his warmth. "And I should speak with the town council about the teaching position. I want to do something meaningful here, not just be a rancher's wife." "You could never be just anything," Daniel said. "That is one of the many things I love about you." Love. He had said it so casually, as though it were already a settled fact. And perhaps it was. Clara had heard people talk about love at first sight, but she had always dismissed it as romanticism. Now she wondered if maybe it was not so much love at first sight as recognition. Recognizing in another person the qualities that matched your own soul, that completed something fundamental. "I love you too," she said, testing the words and finding them true. "Is that insane, to love someone after only a week? If it is, then we are both insane together." He grinned. "I can live with that." They spent the rest of the evening talking about the future, making plans while acknowledging that plans could change. Daniel wanted to expand the ranch, maybe start breeding horses in addition to cattle. Clara wanted to start the school, but also wanted to learn more about ranching, to be a true partner in the operation. They talked about children, about building a bigger house eventually, about all the possibilities that lay ahead. That night, Clara lay in her bed unable to sleep, her mind racing with everything that had happened. 1 week ago she had been dying of thirst in the desert, certain she would never see another sunrise. Now she was planning a future with a man who felt like the other half of her soul. Life was strange and surprising and sometimes, against all odds, beautiful. The next day, Daniel took her back to Shafter to meet with the town council. There were 5 members. The mayor, who was also the owner of the general store, Mrs. Patterson, Sheriff Coleman, Reverend Harris from the church, and Mr. Chen, who ran the town's only restaurant. They gathered in the back room of the general store and listened as Clara explained her qualifications and her desire to teach. "Can you show us your handwriting?" the mayor asked, sliding paper and pencil across the table. Clara wrote out a sample paragraph about the importance of education, making sure her penmanship was neat and clear. She also solved several mathematics problems they posed and read aloud from a book Reverend Harris provided. By the end of the hour-long interview, all 5 council members were nodding approvingly. "We would be honored to have you as our school teacher, Miss Vincent," the mayor said. "The pay is not much, $30 a month, but we can provide a small cottage for you to live in, just behind the church." Clara glanced at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I accept your offer. When would you like me to start? Classes typically begin in September, so you have about a month to prepare. We can show you the schoolhouse today if you like, and get you the books and supplies you will need." After the meeting concluded successfully, the council members showed Clara and Daniel to a small, one-room building that would serve as the school. It was simple but sturdy, with desks for about 20 students, a pot-bellied stove for heat, and a good-sized blackboard. Clara felt a thrill of excitement as she imagined teaching here, shaping young minds and making a real difference in the community. The cottage they offered her was indeed small, just 2 rooms, but it was clean and private. Clara stood in the doorway and tried to imagine living here, and found that while she appreciated the offer, what she really wanted was to be at the ranch with Daniel. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel said quietly, "You do not have to live here if you do not want to. You could stay at the ranch and I could drive you to town each day." "That would not be proper," Clara said, though she wanted exactly that. "People would talk." "Then marry me now," Daniel said. "Not in a year, not in 6 months. Marry me next week, and then it will be completely proper for you to live at the ranch as my wife." Clara turned to face him fully. "You are serious?" "Completely. Clara, I know what I want, and I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build this life together starting now." He took her hands in his. "Say yes." She should have been more cautious, should have insisted on a longer courtship, should have done 100 things differently. But standing there in the dusty street of Shafter, Texas, with the sun beating down and the man she loved looking at her with such hope and honesty, Clara knew exactly what she wanted. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you next week." Daniel let out a whoop of joy that made several passers-by turn and stare, then picked Clara up and spun her around. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, not caring who saw. Clara kissed him back, laughing against his lips, feeling gloriously, wonderfully alive. The next week was a whirlwind of activity. Clara and Daniel met with Reverend Harris to arrange the wedding. Word spread quickly through the small community, and several women, including Mrs. Patterson, showed up at the ranch to help Clara prepare. They brought fabric for a simple but pretty wedding dress, which Clara sewed herself with their assistance. They also brought food for the reception, decorations for the church, and more advice than Clara knew what to do with. "You are sure about this, Mrs. Patterson asked one afternoon as they worked on the dress together. "It is very fast." "I am sure," Clara said without hesitation. "I know it seems rushed, but when you know, you know." The older woman smiled. "My husband proposed after 3 days. Everyone said we were crazy, but we had 42 years together before he passed. Sometimes the heart knows things the head has not figured out yet." On the morning of the wedding, Clara woke in her room at the ranch for what she realized would be the last time as a single woman. By tonight, she would be Mrs. Daniel Lawson, and this room would become a guest room or perhaps eventually a nursery. The thought made her smile. The women arrived early to help her dress and do her hair. The dress was simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, nothing fancy, but Clara thought it was perfect. Mrs. Patterson wove some wildflowers into her hair, and another woman lent her a necklace that had been her grandmother's for luck. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Patterson said, tears in her eyes. Daniel is a lucky man. I am the lucky one, Clara countered, though in truth she thought they were both lucky to have found each other. The church was full when they arrived. It seemed like everyone in Shafter and the surrounding ranches had come to witness the wedding. Clara saw Roy and Tom in the front row, both looking uncharacteristically clean and formal. She saw Sheriff Coleman and Mr. Chen, and what seemed like dozens of others she had met only briefly or not at all. But she only had eyes for Daniel, standing at the altar in a dark suit that made him look even more handsome than usual. His face lit up when he saw her, and Clara felt her heart swell with love and certainty. This was right. This was meant to be. Reverend Harris kept the ceremony simple and sweet. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. When Daniel slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Harris said with a smile. Daniel cupped Clara's face in his hands, just as he had that first time on the porch, and kissed her deeply. The church erupted in applause and cheers, but Clara barely heard it. She was lost in the kiss, in the joy of this moment, in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables laden with food and drink. Someone had brought a fiddle, and soon there was music and dancing. Daniel kept Clara close, one hand always touching her as though he needed to reassure himself that this was real. Happy. He murmured in her ear as they swayed to a slow song. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Clara replied honestly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For opening your door when a desperate stranger knocked. For giving me water, for giving me hope, for giving me a home." She looked up at him. "For giving me everything." "You gave me just as much," Daniel said. "You gave me a reason to come home at the end of the day. You gave me someone to dream about the future with. You gave me love." They were interrupted by Roy, who insisted on dancing with the bride. Then Tom wanted a turn, and then seemingly every man at the wedding. Clara laughed and danced until her feet hurt, but she was always aware of Daniel watching her with those green eyes full of love and pride. As the sun began to set, Daniel pulled Clara aside. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Lawson, Mrs. Lawson." Her new name, her new identity. Clara loved the sound of it. "Yes, let us go home." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon, which someone had decorated with ribbons and tin cans. The noise startled the horses at first, but Daniel got them under control, and soon they were heading back toward the ranch in the golden light of dusk. "Thank you for the most perfect day," Clara said, leaning her head on Daniel's shoulder. "It was perfect, was it not?" He kissed the top of her head. "I cannot wait to spend the rest of my life with you." When they arrived at the ranch, Daniel insisted on carrying Clara over the threshold, which made her laugh. But once inside, the laughter faded into something deeper and more serious. This was their wedding night, the beginning of their life together as husband and wife. Daniel lit a few lamps, casting the room in soft, warm light. Then he turned to Clara and slowly pulled the flowers from her hair, setting them aside carefully. "You are so beautiful," he said softly. "Inside and out. I am the luckiest man alive." Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Make me your wife in truth," she whispered. He kissed her then, deeply and passionately, and swept her up into his arms. He carried her to his bedroom, which was now their bedroom, and laid her gently on the bed. What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward in the way of first times, but it was also filled with love and joy, and the sense of two people becoming truly one. Afterward they lay tangled together, Clara's head on Daniel's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow back to normal. "I love you," she said into the darkness. I love you too, he replied, his arms tightening around her. Always. Clara fell asleep that night feeling completely safe and completely happy, her past with all its pain and uncertainty finally behind her. The next few weeks were an adjustment as Clara settled fully into her new life. She learned more about ranching, insisting that Daniel teach her so she could be a true partner. She learned to ride a horse properly, to check cattle for signs of illness, to mend fences and manage accounts. Daniel was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish for not knowing things. At the same time, Clara prepared for the school year. She organized the schoolroom, planned lessons, and met with the parents who would be sending their children to her. There were 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, a good number for a small community school. On the first day of school, Clara was so nervous she could barely eat breakfast. Daniel noticed and pulled her into a hug. "You are going to be wonderful. Those children are lucky to have you. What if I mess up? What if I cannot control them or teach them properly? Then you will learn and do better the next day." He kissed her forehead. "Clara, you are smart and patient and kind. That is exactly what those children need." His faith in her gave Clara courage. When she walked into the schoolroom that morning and saw 15 pairs of eyes looking at her with a mixture of curiosity and hope, she took a deep breath and began. "Good morning, students. My name is Mrs. Lawson, and I am very excited to be your teacher this year. We are going to learn so many wonderful things together." The day went better than she had hoped. The children were eager and attentive, and Clara found that she genuinely enjoyed teaching. She loved the moment when a difficult concept finally clicked for a student, loved seeing their pride when they mastered something new. By the time Daniel came to pick her up that afternoon, Clara was tired but exhilarated. "How did it go?" he asked as she climbed into the wagon beside him. "It was amazing, challenging but amazing." She told him about the day, about the children, and what they had learned. Daniel listened with genuine interest, asking questions and laughing at her stories. This became their routine. Daniel would drive Clara to school each morning, then return to work the ranch with Roy and Tom. In the afternoon, he would come back to get her, and she would tell him about her day while he told her about his. In the evenings, they would work together on ranch tasks or school preparations, then sit on the porch and watch the stars come out. It was not always easy. There were days when the cattle got out and Daniel had to work from dawn until midnight rounding them up. There were days when students misbehaved and Clara had to figure out how to discipline them fairly. There were days when they were both exhausted and snapped at each other, only to apologize later. But through it all, their love grew stronger. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned how to support each other through challenges, learned how to celebrate victories together. They became not just husband and wife, but true partners in every sense of the word. About 3 months into their marriage, Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be sure before saying anything. When Dr. Hayes confirmed it during a visit to town, Clara felt a mixture of joy and terror. She was going to be a mother. She and Daniel were going to have a baby. She decided to tell him that evening after dinner. She was nervous, though she knew he would be happy. They had talked about wanting children, but she had not expected it to happen quite so soon. "Daniel, I have something to tell you," she said as they cleared the dishes. He looked at her, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong, at least I do not think so." Clara took his hands in hers. "Daniel, I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her as though processing the information. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Clara had ever seen. "A baby. We are having a baby." "Yes, we are. Dr. Hayes says the baby should come in late May or early June." Daniel let out a shout of joy and picked Clara up, spinning her carefully before setting her down. "We are having a baby, Clara. This is the most wonderful news." He kissed her deeply, then dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I cannot wait to meet you," Clara laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "I do not think the baby can hear you yet." "How do you know? Maybe they can." He looked up at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for this life, for everything. We made this baby together," Clara reminded him. "It is our gift, not just mine." Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms. "I am going to be a father. I am going to be the best father I can be, I promise. I know you will." Clara held him tight, feeling the baby she carried as a promise of the future they were building together. The months that followed were busy. Clara continued teaching, though she knew she would need to take a break once the baby came. Daniel threw himself into preparations, building a cradle and adding a room onto the house for the nursery. Roy and Tom were both excited about the upcoming arrival, already arguing over who would be the baby's favorite uncle. Winter passed into spring, and Clara's belly grew round. She felt the baby move for the first time in February, a flutter like butterflies that made her gasp with wonder. When she placed Daniel's hand on her stomach so he could feel it too, he looked at her with such awe and love that she fell in love with him all over again. "That is our baby," he whispered. "Moving around inside you, it is a miracle." "It is," Clara agreed, "the best kind of miracle." As her due date approached, Clara had to stop teaching. The school board had found a temporary replacement, a retired teacher from El Paso who would finish out the year. Clara missed her students, but she was also ready to focus on preparing for the baby. In late May, on a warm afternoon with thunderclouds building on the horizon, Clara's labor began. Daniel immediately rode for town to fetch Dr. Hayes and the midwife, Mrs. Sullivan, who was Roy's wife and had assisted with many births. By the time they arrived, Clara's contractions were coming regularly, and she was in considerable pain. "You are doing well, Mrs. Sullivan said, checking Clara's progress. "First babies take their time, but everything looks normal." Daniel stayed by Clara's side through it all, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. He whispered encouragement when she felt like she could not do it anymore, and he did not flinch when she squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt during contractions. After 12 hours of labor, as the sun was rising on a new day, Clara gave birth to a son. The baby's first cry was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Dr. Hayes cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket, then placed him in Clara's arms. "A boy," Clara whispered, looking down at the tiny, perfect face. "Daniel, we have a son." Daniel was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and child. "He is perfect, absolutely perfect." He gently touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around his father's finger. "Hello, son. I am your papa, and I love you so much already." "What shall we name him?" Clara asked, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Daniel looked at his son for a long moment, then said, "How about James? James Daniel Lawson, after my father and me." "James," Clara repeated, testing the name. "I love it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, little one." After Dr. Hayes and Mrs. Sullivan left, declaring both mother and baby healthy, Daniel climbed into bed beside Clara. The three of them lay together, James sleeping peacefully between his parents, and Clara felt a sense of completion she had not known she was missing. "Thank you," Daniel said softly. "Thank you for our son." "Thank you for everything," Clara replied. "For giving me water when I was dying. For giving me a home. for giving me love and purpose and now this beautiful baby. You saved my life in more ways than you know." "You saved mine too," Daniel said. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you knocked on my door. You brought light and love into my life, Clara. You and James are my whole world." They stayed like that for a long time, the new little family, watching the sunrise through the window and dreaming about the future. James was a good baby, healthy and generally content. Clara recovered from childbirth quickly and fell into the rhythms of motherhood with surprising ease. Daniel was an involved father from the start, changing diapers and walking the floor with James at night so Clara could sleep. He talked to his son constantly, telling him about the ranch and the cattle and all the things they would do together when James was older. When fall came, Clara returned to teaching part-time, bringing James with her to school. The students were enchanted with the baby and begged to hold him. Clara found that having James in the classroom actually made her a better teacher. She was more patient, more understanding of the challenges parents faced, more aware of how precious and short childhood really was. Years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch prospered, and Daniel was able to hire more hands and expand the herd. Clara's school grew as more families settled in the area, attracted by the promise of education for their children. James grew from a baby into a bright, curious toddler and then an energetic young boy. When James was 3, Clara got pregnant again. This time she had an easier labor and delivered a healthy daughter they named Sarah Rose. 2 years later came another son, Benjamin, and then 3 years after that, twin girls they named Emma and Elizabeth. The house that had seemed so large when Clara first arrived now echoed with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Daniel built additions to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch became a true home, filled with life and love. On their 10th anniversary, after the children were asleep, Daniel and Clara sat on the porch as they had on their first evening together. So much had changed, yet this remained the same. The two of them, the sunset, the vast Texas landscape stretching out before them. "You ever regret it?" Daniel asked, taking Clara's hand. "Choosing this life. It is not easy raising children out here far from cities and culture." "Never," Clara said without hesitation. "This is exactly where I am meant to be. You and our children are exactly what I am meant to have." She squeezed his hand. "What about you? Any regrets?" "Not a single one." "Well, maybe one." Clara looked at him in surprise. "What?" Daniel grinned. "I regret not kissing you that first day when you knocked on my door. I should have known right then that you were the one." Clara laughed and leaned over to kiss him. "You made up for it later." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Clara thought back to that desperate woman who had knocked on this door 10 years ago, dying of thirst and out of hope. She could barely recognize that person now. That Clara had been broken by loss and hardship, uncertain of her place in the world. This Clara knew exactly who she was. She was a wife and mother, a teacher and partner, a woman who had built a life from nothing and made it into something beautiful. She had a husband who loved her as an equal, children who filled her days with joy, and a purpose that gave her life meaning. "Thank you," she said softly. Daniel looked at her. "For what?" "For giving me water when I needed it. For giving me a well so I would never go thirsty again. For giving me a home, not just a house, but a real home where I belong." Clara smiled at him. "You gave me everything, Daniel Lawson." "We gave each other everything," he corrected. "That is what love is. Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to build something together." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, thinking about how true that was. She had not been saved by Daniel. She had been offered a chance and she had taken it. She had worked hard, built relationships, created value. Yes, Daniel had opened the door, but she had walked through it and made this life her own. "I love you," she said. "I love you too, always." Daniel kissed the top of her head, now and forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Clara thought about the future. James would grow up and probably take over the ranch someday. Sarah might become a teacher like her mother. Benjamin talked about becoming a doctor. The twins were still too young to know what they might want, but Clara and Daniel would support them in whatever they chose. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. The ranch would have good years and bad years. The children would face their own struggles and disappointments. Life in the West was never easy, never certain, but they would face it all together as a family built on a foundation of love and mutual respect. And that, Clara knew, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Inside the house, one of the babies started crying. Clara started to get up, but Daniel stopped her. "I will get her. You rest." She watched him go inside, this good man who had become the center of her world. Then she looked out at the ranch, at the land they had worked and built and loved. This was her legacy. Not just the children, though they were precious. Not just the school, though teaching was important. But this life, this marriage, this partnership built on equal footing and genuine love. Clara remembered something her mother had told her long ago. Life is not about the hand you are dealt, but how you play it. She had been dealt a difficult hand, losing her parents, being robbed and abandoned in the desert. But she had played it well. She had survived, and then she had thrived. Daniel came back out, the baby settled and sleeping again. He sat down beside Clara and took her hand, and they watched the stars emerge one by one, filling the sky with light. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Clara asked. "When I asked how I could repay you. I said you did not owe me anything. You were wrong." Clara turned to face him. "I owe you my life, and I will spend every day of the rest of it showing you how grateful I am that you opened your door, that you gave me water, that you gave me a chance at happiness. And I will spend every day showing you that you deserve all of it and more." Daniel pulled her close. "We are a team, Clara, now and always." The night deepened around them, quiet and peaceful. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch settled into evening rhythms. And Clara and Daniel sat together, as they had so many times before and would so many times again, grateful for the life they had built and the love they shared. Clara had knocked on a stranger's door asking for water to save her life. That stranger had given her water, yes, but so much more. He had given her a well that would never run dry, a source of sustenance and life. He had given her a home, not just shelter but belonging. He had given her love and partnership and children and purpose, and she had given him the same in return. That was the real miracle of their story. Not that one person had saved the other, but that they had found each other at exactly the right moment. Two people ready to build something beautiful together. Two people willing to work hard, to love deeply, to commit fully. Two people who had become one family, one heart, one home. As the moon rose over the Texas plains, casting silver light across the land, Clara Lawson smiled. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. She had asked for water, and she had received an ocean of love. She had asked for help, and she had received a lifetime of partnership. She had knocked on a door, desperate and dying, and she had found not just survival but abundant life. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible, and it was hers. It was theirs. It was real and true and lasting. And as Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders and she heard the gentle sound of her children's breathing through the open window, Clara knew that this was what happily ever after really looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Built on hard work and genuine love and the daily choice to show up for each other. no matter what. This was her story. Their story. A story that had started with a desperate knock on a door and had become a beautiful life, rich with love and meaning and joy. The best story Clara could have ever imagined, and it was far from over. There would be more chapters to write, more adventures to have, more challenges to face and overcome together. James would bring home his first sweetheart someday. Sarah would stand in front of her own classroom. Benjamin would heal his first patient. The twins would find their own paths. And through it all, Clara and Daniel would be there, supporting each other and their children, building the legacy they had started on that day when a dying woman knocked on a cowboy's door and found not just water, but everything her heart had been seeking. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. And Clara was ready for all of it, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. That was love. That was home. That was everything.